Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday, happy Pride, happy belated Juneteenth. I'm really excited to be here with some tremendous leaders of community to help roll out what is our community safety work group recommendations. Big thank you to Stephen Belton and the Urban League for hosting us today, and a gigantic thank you to this particular work group for now what I believe is over 7 months' worth of work. These are 22 individuals that have come together from a variety of different perspectives and backgrounds to come together with a concrete plan. And that's something that is easier said than done. When you have diverging opinions, and at times adamantly diverging opinions, it gets all the more difficult to come together on a consensus to issue clear, objective recommendations that can ultimately be enacted. And so when we put together this group, I'll tell you, I had the most hope, but at the same time, I also had concerns as to the ability and our collective ability to issue clear recommendations that could be implemented. Now that is exactly what they did. They put together a series of recommendations around policy form, recruiting strategies, safety beyond policing, government structure, and several more that can change the face of how public safety operates in our city. And this is work that is not just going to sit in a binder on a shelf. This is work that can be carried out. And while we are still doing our due diligence at the city on these recommendations, I'll tell you that nothing's off the table. There are no non-starters with what they're about to present to you. And some of them will happen sooner than others. Some of them will happen in the immediacy. Some of them are already taking place. Others, they're pretty robust, and it'll take a bit longer to get set up. So I want to make sure that we set the expectations from the very beginning. We right now have to be in the business of building community trust, and one of the fastest ways to decimate it is if we're over-promising and then under-delivering. And so, again, there are too many names here to list, but the 22 members, to be exact, but we're joined by many of those members today. I want to give a very, very special thank you first to our co-chairs, to Nikema Levy-Armstrong. And you don't appoint Nikema Levy-Armstrong to be a co-chair because it's easy. You appoint Nikema Levy-Armstrong as a co-chair because she is going to implement real, tangible changes, or she's going to recommend real and tangible changes, and then hold us to it to get it done. Reverend Dr. Dwayne Davis has been there since day one. I'm so appreciative of your work. Your presence, there's no doubt, has had a huge impact on making sure that this group stayed together and stayed at the table to make these changes. And I also want to give a huge thank you to our city staff. There are a number of proposals that you will find in these recommendations that are already underway, and this report provides additional color for them. And the way we were able to do that is to have city staff that are in there making sure that the work of the city and the work of these recommendations are working part and parcel. So a big thank you to Fatima Moore, to Interim Chief Huffman, to Sasha Cotton, to Jared Jeffries in my office, Andrew Hawkins, and Brian Smith. So appreciate their work on this. It's a big, big deal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nikema Levy-Armstrong to talk through the process behind these recommendations. Thank you so much, Ms. Levy-Armstrong.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm really proud of the work of our Community Safety Work Group, which has been working since December and met over the course of several months to formulate the recommendations that you now have access to. I want to thank all 22 members who were a part of our Community Safety Work Group, and I especially want to thank the city staff, Fatima Moore and Jared Jeffries, who did a lot of heavy lifting amongst our group, along with other city staff who participated in the meetings and who gave us insight into some of the city processes that contributed to our recommendations. We also want to thank the members of the public and the community who participated in a forum that we held at Sabathani Community Center on May 11th, who also submitted comments through a Google Voice number that we supplied, as well as through a Google survey. And so we took those particular recommendations and we included many of them on page 9 of the report. And we actually started our report off with the community recommendations. We know that for many years, and for some communities, decades, particularly the Black community, folks have been crying out for a change to our system of policing within the city of Minneapolis. They've borne the brunt of these issues, and their voices matter. In addition to hearing from the community, we also heard from a series of experts, both in and outside of the state of Minnesota, regarding best practices and the standards that we should hold ourselves to as the city of Minneapolis with regard to overhauling aspects of our system that are not effective and unfortunately causing harm. Now, in the midst of our work, we also had access to the report from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights that was released in April. There's also an ongoing DOJ investigation, and we're waiting to see what the Civil Rights Division has to say about the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, in terms of our work, after reviewing lots of documents, talking to various experts, talking to community members, we decided to hone in on police reform and police accountability, as well as trying to address the issues of violence within the city of Minneapolis that cause some of our most vulnerable community members to feel unsafe. So if you look at page 12 of our report, our first recommendation is focused on improving the oversight and coordination within the Minneapolis Police Department. Now that the voters went to the polls last November, they gave the mayor some increased authority. We want to see the mayor seize that opportunity in order to implement a lot of these changes that we are recommending, if not all of the changes. And so one way for that to happen is for there to be a person who is responsible for oversight and coordination within MPD. We feel that there needs to be a person in a position that can be a liaison with the mayor, that can provide more direct oversight of what is happening within MPD, and that can ensure that the recommendations that are coming forward are being implemented, and that there is follow-through, that there is reporting to the public. That can only happen if there is someone who can help provide that additional oversight and coordination between the Minneapolis Police Department as well as the mayor's office. Now, following the other recommendations that I'm going to mention, I'm going to bring up Steve Kramer, CEO and president of the Downtown Business Council, who's going to talk about our second recommendation, which is focused on MPD's recruitment and hiring process. So I won't get into that because Steve is going to cover that particular issue. But two other issues that I will cover that were critical to our work was looking at the issue of training within the Minneapolis Police Department. I know that some folks think that the training is sufficient. However, in our work, we found that the current training regimen is inadequate to create a world-class police department that treats all of its citizens with dignity and respect. So we are recommending that Minneapolis Police Department hire a group called IADList, which is an internationally known organization that MPD is actually a part of that can assist with overhauling our training. In particular, focusing on IADList certified courses as well as instructors, and removing some of the training that is currently happening from just happening internally, and actually focusing on national and international best practices to continue to professionalize the department. And so that is a big lift that we think is vitally important if we're going to have a stronger police department that is well-trained. And as you all know, one of the major issues that came up in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed was Derek Chauvin's role as a field training officer. When we looked into that field training officer program, what we saw were a lot of gaps, inefficiencies, rubber stamping of the status quo that led to someone like Derek Chauvin being in a position of power and authority that he should never have been in. And so the field training officer program needs to be completely overhauled to ensure that only the best of the best are placed in leadership positions where they have responsibility over new recruits and younger officers. And it's our hope that with an overhaul of that program, you will prevent people like Derek Chauvin from being in those types of positions. In terms of another aspect of our work that we focused on, we looked at the disciplinary system within the Minneapolis Police Department, which of course is woefully inadequate to address the ongoing concerns, misconduct, misbehavior by members of the Minneapolis Police Department. We need to overhaul the disciplinary system and have very clear metrics and mechanisms for when someone is disciplined. We also are urging Mayor Frey to take a look at the system of coaching within the disciplinary system to make sure that that system is effective. Right now, we feel that there are too many gaps within the system of coaching, and coaching is too often being used as a catch-all for behavior that actually should result in more tangible conduct for officers who violate the law and who violate people's rights. So with that, I want to turn it over to Steve Kramer, CEO and President of the Downtown Council, who is going to talk about another major gap that we found in terms of recruiting and the recommendations that their subcommittee focused on. Thank you.
Nakima, thank you very much. There's a great deal of talk about the number of officers currently working in Minneapolis, understandably so. It's important to remember the authorized sworn strength of MPD is 888 officers. To get back to that number, or even close to it, is certainly a significant challenge, but more importantly, a major opportunity to rebuild a department not just in numbers, but in culture, values, and practices. As our report states, the citizens of Minneapolis affirmed in the last election that they want a police department to serve all the city's residents with integrity and respect. An essential element to fulfilling this expectation is building a first-in-class recruiting program tied to significant improvements in the quality of MPD training, as Nakima just discussed. Important steps have already been taken. Addressing compensation parity is a good example, but more must be done. I applaud recent actions the mayor outlined just yesterday in a Star Tribune commentary, and the working group offers our comprehensive recommendations as a roadmap to make additional progress towards that first-in-class recruiting and training program our city needs to be successful. On recruiting specifically, the working group offered recommendations in 4 areas. In our view, a place to start is with the internal recruiting team. It's under-resourced and stretched too thin given the magnitude of the work ahead. We offer suggestions on additional sworn staff and adding additional sworn staff and civilian experts to the team. Next, we recognize there are multiple paths to becoming an officer within MPD serving our community. There are ways each of those pathways can be strengthened and supported to develop the force we aspire to have. And we outline dozens of ways that can happen in the report. We also point out that, like any good employer these days, it's important to continually review internal departmental and city HR requirements and processes to ensure there are no artificial barriers to bringing on recruits who can successfully serve. Next, MPD needs an updated marketing and communications plan and supporting materials to present an authentic and candid message about why individuals, especially from our community, should consider a career in law enforcement in Minneapolis to be part of the change we need. It's a highly competitive marketplace for potential recruits, and MPD needs to make its case in a more compelling and professional way. Finally, we are convinced there are many essential resources outside of City Hall, in the private sector, community organizations, local philanthropy, and elsewhere that can be catalyzed to help, as the report reads, in the transformation of MPD as a department committed to effective, just, and unbiased policing. We recommend organizing an advisory panel of external experts to help provide ongoing access to community resources, to maintain needed focus, and to serve as a sounding board and a source of support for this work. No doubt, building back MPD is an urgent matter, but realistically, it will take sustained effort over a period of years. We'll be well-served to continue to invest now to build that first-in-class recruiting and training program to meet our current challenge and opportunity, and to maintain MPD, and to maintain the MPD our community needs over time. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Dwayne Davis, our co-chair, to talk about the next section of the report. Reverend Davis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I want to thank the mayor again and thank my co-chair, Ms. Levy Armstrong. I also just want to thank all of the members of the work group. I tell you, it was indeed a pleasure to work with them. We were a group of opinionated people. We came from various parts of this community, but I think that's a testament to the product that we have just created and given to the mayor. We were candid and we were determined to make this moment count. I do want to talk about the community safety or the prevention and intervention parts of this. And one of the things that we did as we talked to experts here in the city, and I'm so grateful to those experts in our city who really walked us through their prevention and intervention work, but we also talked to national leaders in this field. And one thing that we came out of here understanding is that if we wanted to make real progress in community safety, that is, protecting our citizens not only from state violence, but community violence, that we could not cleave prevention and intervention from the larger public safety interest, meaning the police could not do all of this work by itself. It is not capable of doing all that work, and it needs to be a part of a coordinated, collaborating system. And so we wanted to make sure that the mayor has an opportunity to lift up the work of prevention and intervention on equal footing as a part of this strategy with the police. So we are going to recommend here expanding services and programs that limit unnecessary encounters with armed law enforcement. And we also want to increase investment in alternative responses to people and communities in crisis. And one way of doing that, we're going to talk about one of the things that we really found out, that we could do those things, the mayor could invest, we could expand these programs, but there must be coordination across jurisdictions, across agencies. So you have an explicit recommendation about how to coordinate and communicate on a multi-jurisdictional, multi-executive level to deal with community violence. Our specific recommendations is go and look at the work that's already being done, work that's showing promise, and that is increasing ongoing funding for violence interrupters and outreach workers. We know in the places where that's happening, there are good results, especially because it is community-based. People understand those people in their communities. They know them. They interact with them. And there are other communities that don't have that coverage. And so if the mayor expands that program, expand the use of violence interrupters and outreach in communities that don't have it, we can expand the coverage and we can get that same result of meeting that demand for contact and, more importantly, trust that our city is looking out for people's safety. We also know that there are a lot of groups, small groups, community groups that are doing work in their own communities who are not waiting on the police but are trying to address community violence. And it would be very helpful if the city can recognize some of those work. And so we are asking for an increase in funding for Office of Violence Prevention to provide some small grants to help those communities that are already doing some of that community violence, not waiting, but are looking at what's going on the ground in their communities and responding to it. We also want the mayor to look at the programs. We discovered that there are many agencies that have in their purview work on youth development, youth employment, and youth recreation opportunities. And we think the mayor can show some leadership and coordinate all of those responses. We think there needs to be a much more intentional and coordinated response to our youth. And so in part of that expansion and investment in prevention and intervention, we're asking the mayor to look into coordinating all of these agencies that have a hand in doing youth activities and development to expand that work. We also know that the intervention and prevention programs that we already use are based on evidence-based information and studies. And we want to make sure that we keep doing that. And so one of the things that we are asking the mayor to do is also increase support for program evaluation to look at micro and macro level impacts. We don't want any of these prevention and intervention programs to be subject to the vagaries of politics or changes in politics. We want that evidence-based response to continue, and so we want to make sure that there is investments in studying how these programs are working, what are the best practices that we are implementing, and what is available to us. And then coordination. Coordination. We even looked at the history of Minneapolis, and we discovered that when Minneapolis was part of a coordinated strategy for community safety, we got results. Our communities became safer because there was always sort of strategizing together with various agencies, with various jurisdictions. And so we're asking the mayor to take the lead on convening a monthly, multi-jurisdictional, executive-level meeting focused on public safety strategies, planning, and coordination. We also are inviting to even look at the possibility of establishing a common vision and a plan across jurisdictions and agencies for coordinating safety plans. Data sharing, sharing data to improve that coordination. One of the things that one of our work group members I'm going to bring up to talk about in the behavioral response program is that the reason we're seeing success is because there is direct real-time coordination between police department and behavioral crisis response units. And that's the kind of coordination we think can work across many agencies, and we're hoping that the mayor will take the lead on that. And finally, all of these hold together, coordination, investments, expansion of these programs by continuing to make sure that the dollars go there. The mayor has in his power to do that, to make sure that there's coordination going on. And I do want to just take some time because we really had spent a lot of time looking at alternative responses to law enforcement, especially when people are in crisis, when communities are in crisis. And so one of our behavioral crisis response recommendations is where we really did some work. And I want to bring Chela Guzman-Weigert, who is a deputy assistant administrator for Hennepin County, to talk to you about that, because this is, I think, a real example of what coordination and expansion can look like. Chela?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Reverend Davis and Mayor. I have the opportunity to speak to you about one of the categories that we have, the fourth category of our recommendations, as it relates to the behavioral or mental health crisis response. And so we recommend that the city expand, build upon its current behavioral and mental health crisis response strategy. As a work group, you've heard that we had the opportunity to listen to many stakeholders, that we learned and heard from community that they had suggestions and a strong desire to see an improved response, police response to 911 calls, as well as the need for behavioral crisis response to be high, a high level on our recommendations. As part of our work, we had the opportunity to learn about Minneapolis's current behavioral crisis response, or BCR team, and that launched back in December of 2021. We've learned that that team currently is available Monday through Friday, 24 hours a day, and works throughout the city, in every neighborhood, in every ward, and in every precinct. We recommend that the mayor build upon the promising results of this pilot program and ensure that it's well-funded, that the crisis care continuum can expand, that will offer a range of layered, tailored responses to residents who have diverse behavioral and mental health needs. We indicated that Minneapolis should explore and increase investment on the use of additional supports, like embedded social workers or embedded mental health professionals, not only in 911, but also in police departments. We also want the city to continue to explore co-responder teams and how they can be used to help de-escalate and respond appropriately when there are crisis needs. Our recommendations also include the increased use of alternative non-police response, as well as an increased investment in the use of mobile behavioral crisis teams, just like the BCR team that was launched last year. We know that these professionals have responded to calls from adults, from children, that are dealing with mental health or crisis situations, and they need help. Crisis stabilization centers or services should also be leveraged and utilized. And we listened to what community said. Minneapolis needs to be responsive to the community needs, and that requires a partnership. Minneapolis can't do it alone, but Minneapolis should continue to meet the needs that they're seeing in community. So we recommend that they continue to strengthen its partnerships. That means with other government entities, like the county. That means to collaborate with community-based providers. It also means to enhance the strategies that address residents' well-being. One thing that we heard, and it was demonstrated to us, is that the mayor and the city is committed to continuing to invite and engage its residents, those with lived experience. And so we recommend that we continue to invite these individuals to share and to help improve the city's response and stabilization follow-up services. There are a number of changes on the horizon, and it's imperative that the city take its role as a convener, but also as an informer, and to educate and empower its community to best respond to the behavioral crisis that we are currently living with. So with that, I'll invite the mayor back up, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chella, to our co-chairs and the other wonderful 22 members of this work group. I think it's clear that we've got a lot of strong recommendations that are ready to be implemented. And now the timing of these recommendations coming forward now was not accidental. One, it took a while for them to come together in a consensus form and a while to give clear and objective recs. Two, we wanted them early enough so that we would be able to incorporate them in some form in our 2023 budget, which will likely be rolled out or recommended in, I believe, late August. And so we're going to be digesting this report in the coming weeks and provide a more of an implementation plan as to the criteria that's laid out. And as we all know, and I've said before, there's no one simple quick fix for public safety. There's no one simple fix for accountability. What we do know is that they are not mutually exclusive, but they are extrinsically linked. And I'm really appreciative of this wonderful work that this group has put together, and also appreciative of Nikema coming out here on her birthday, which is today. And so with that, I will open it to questions that you may have. And of course, some of them may be directed at me and some of them may be directed at others. Go ahead, Andy.
Sure. Mayor Frey, a couple mentions of the MDHR report, among other things, it cited that some reforms were implemented on paper but didn't really take in practice. Warrior-style training ban, for example. Is there a system in place to make sure that these are implemented and measure the outcomes and et cetera? Or why is this going to be any different?
Well, I think that's a big part of why this deep-seated work was so necessary, and that's a big part of why these recommendations came forward now, is it's not just about a policy change. As I've mentioned before, we have enacted a ton of policy changes, especially in these last couple of years. It's not just about having the change on paper, it's making sure that that change is implemented throughout the department, not just at administration, but it's some of the other ranks that are supervisory, but above your regular officer, above the rank and file. And so there's a number of recommendations that are given here to making sure that those changes are carried out. Some of them, by the way, are already underway. One of them, which I know that a committee in the City Council is discussing today, is our Field Training Officer program. That is a really important policy change that these recommendations have provided quite a bit of color to. One that previously, good officers that had significant ambitions to rise in their careers within the MPD or within policing generally didn't necessarily have the incentive to become field training officers. We want to change that. We want to make sure that we get the right individuals in to these positions so that they're able to make sure that there's the proper social conditioning on officers that are coming in beyond the initial training as part of the classes themselves. There's work that is undergoing, and you've already heard around the disciplinary matrix. And one of the recommendations that this group has come forward with is a disciplinary reset. That is also being implemented. There's hiring and retention work that's happening. There's government structure work that I know the Reverend highlighted, but is really paramount, making sure that we can have a fully integrated system of public safety, and we've got an individual in the Commissioner of the Office of Community Safety that's able to carry that out. That's going to be huge because my office can't do it alone. So the answer to the question is yes. We absolutely need to make sure that these policy changes are not limited to paper, but they're carried out in practice.
I know you say you don't have an exact timeline, but how soon could we see some of these things, and what are some of the next steps that will be taken over the next couple months?
So the question was, what is the timeline? The timeline differs depending on the recommendation. So there's a number of recommendations that you will see in the immediacy that will come to pass. One example, again, is the field training officer work that I believe is today. It's being presented, and we're in the process of carrying that out throughout the Minneapolis Police Department. Disciplinary matrix is another one, but inevitably there's going to need to be revamps and changes as we're better responding to the needs that are happening on the ground and to have true accountability in our department. There are some things that we are going to see in the 2023 budget. So undoubtedly, there are proposals, and safety beyond policing is one, where we are going to have additional allocations within the budget itself. And then some of them, and I've been candid, will take longer. And so I know I'd have to go through each one line by line to give you a rundown, but the fact of the matter is that these recommendations are robust. They're significant. They will help to create real change, and some of them will happen quickly, and some of them will take longer, and that's the truth of the matter. It's an extended answer, but the truth. Andy.
Nikema, you mentioned the coaching system needing to be revamped. You called it a catch-all for complaints. As I'm sure you know, the consequence of that is the vast majority of sustained complaints against Minneapolis police officers are kept private data under how Minneapolis has interpreted that law. Has there been a discussion? I mean, if this is a catch-all, if some of these shouldn't have been coached, has there been a discussion about opening up these records or retroactively reclassifying them so we can see what these allegations are?
Well, I think that should be on the table in terms of trying to bring forward a new paradigm with regard to the way that the Minneapolis Police Department operates. There has not been the level of transparency that is necessary, nor has there been adequate accountability. And back when we found out about coaching multiple years ago, being used as a standard practice for so-called discipline within the department, we raised concerns then. And from my perspective, that issue has not yet been resolved. That is why we are recommending outside professional help for the department to look at our disciplinary system, as the mayor said, to bring forward a disciplinary reset and to ensure that the way that the discipline matrix has been established is in alignment with national best practices. Again, too often things are happening internally, and then we're being told something as the public, and it doesn't necessarily line up with best practices. And so bringing in outside professionals who can look at our disciplinary system, we've even put a link into the Indianapolis disciplinary matrix as a prime example of a structure that seems to be in alignment with best practices. Any other?
Mayor, can I just ask a question? I mean, the Kingdom would do amazing work no matter what. But I'm standing here and this entire time, I'm hearing about the police reform. I didn't really get anything out of the piece about the violence that we're suffering through in this community. We have asked that you unite those organizations in the community that is funded under the Office of Violence Prevention, but we have been further separated out in the community trying to do this work. So I do applaud you, Nikki, you know that. But the piece on public safety, I went through this whole thing and it's like a page that it shouldn't even be in this packet because it did not tell me anything that's going to be done about this violence that we're suffering through in this community right now.
So I'm happy to invite up others. I'll take a first stab, and Reverend, you can perhaps expand on it.
Can I suggest that?
Please, yeah.
Call an immediate retreat for everyone who is out here doing this work. Bring us into the same space to talk about what it is we're doing, how effective that is, because the divide is why people can't see the good work that organizations are out here doing in the community. I've asked you that.
Yeah, you have. And Lisa, I think that's a good suggestion. And so right now, we're in the process of building out this new government structure. As part of that new government structure, the Office of Violence Prevention will be set towards an office around neighborhood safety. It's not just a name change, it's perhaps also an expansion of responsibility. It's not just an expansion of responsibility, it's also an opportunity, as you've mentioned, to have the kind of reset where we're bringing all of these different groups together, some of them working on the same stuff, to figure out where those gaps are and how we best work together to attack the issue of safety. So I think that's a good idea, one. And two, a lot of the issues that were addressed today, maybe they were only addressed in part, but it goes to the work around safety. Steve Kramer mentioned the work around recruitment. Now, there's a whole list of other recommendations, from making sure that we've got the right recruiting firms in, to we've got the best practices around getting community-oriented people, to making sure that we're recruiting, for instance, Northsiders to be on our police department. We've got wage increases. I believe it was an 8.5% wage increase supplemented with a $7,000 bonus to make sure we're getting the best possible officers to do this very difficult work. I know that's something that you've supported. And we also need to make sure that it's comprehensive. And by that I mean getting this whole new structure set up where we're better able to integrate this whole response between the Office of Neighborhood Safety, I keep forgetting what the new name of it is, but I believe that's it, the police department, fire, EMS, et cetera. And so that'll happen. And you make a fair point. Reverend, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Lisa, thank you. And we heard that. That's why we have been recommending that the mayor bring back the kind of coordination. That coordination piece is what we're getting at. That everyone needs to be sitting in the room together to come up with, not only report what they're doing, but also offer a strategy, be a part of the planning and the coordination. From the mayor's office, from other jurisdictions, the police department, all need to be hearing from the community organizations what's going on. We want to elevate prevention and intervention work up to the level of sworn officer work. We want to elevate them, put them in the same room, in the same conversation, coordinating with other jurisdictions, with other agencies about how to do that work. So when we were talking about that, that's one of the things that we were worried about, is that we are not hearing from those prevention and intervention groups, and that we want the city to make sure that that happens, that we are not an afterthought, that the community organizations are not an afterthought, and that you're part of the strategy, the planning, and the coordinating. I wanted Bridget from our work group, because she's on one of those neighborhood groups, and I think she can talk a little bit about, because she worked very hard on us and reminding us of that kind of work and that prevention part. Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Miss Lisa, thank you for bringing up that valid point, because you and I have had several conversations of how to bring the groups together. I want to thank the committee for hearing my voice when I did bring it up, because it wasn't just my voice, it was the voice of all of the organizations. There's 85 different groups that are part of OVP, and all of us do need to be in the room, because when I have done training in the past with SWAT, just to give them an idea of where we stand and how we work and how we can work collaboratively, we actually saw that work come together from Minneapolis PD, one of our groups, Agape Movement, which I'm a part of, and then Brian Smith's group, which we talked about earlier, which is BCR, Behavioral Crisis Response. And we all worked together at one scene. And MPD trusted us enough after it was an inactive gun that was taken out. We were able to get the scene released to us and do what we're supposed to do for the community. And it worked well, and it worked well enough to show that all three can come together, work together, and have success, and have someone actually continue on living life and breathing. So thank you, Ms. Lisa, for bringing that up, because that was something, that was a point that I just kept making. We have to get in the room. We have to stay together. You guys have to hear the voice of the people that are actually doing the work. Thank you.
Did you have anything to add about office community safety? Did you have anything about government structure that you wanted to add on that front? Or just off OCS?
Yes, and thank you, Mayor, for that prompt about government structure. That's one of the reasons why we really were checking in on the government structure work group, because our intention, as we were hearing from not only our city agencies, but those agencies across the nation who were doing evidence-based work, that we really needed to elevate prevention and intervention. It cannot be an also-ran, it cannot be sort of an auxiliary agency. And so under the new government structure, we were pleased to see that they recommended a community safety section that would include Office of Violence Prevention and Office of Performance Innovation. And so that's why this coordination piece, we also wanted to dovetail that. Now that we have a government structure that would include that intervention piece, then this coordination piece again, and historically again, we looked at when Minneapolis was called Murderapolis. And the way that the response to that was coordinated multi-jurisdictional collaboration. And now we know, given the organizations you're talking about, Ms. Lisa, if those organizations, those prevention organizations are part of that coordinated system, that we hear from you, hear from those organizations, the work that you're doing, we believe that a strategy, a comprehensive strategy, can be implemented that will address the real direct violence that our youth are, especially that's going on now. Another part of that is, one of the things that we have in two parts of this report, we really do highlight that there must be an intentional focus on what's going on with youth, an intentional focus on dealing with some of the other issues that our youth encounter, whether that be employment, whether that be diversions, whether that be, but intentional investments and focus. And so even that piece, hopefully, that part of it, the mayor can take advantage not only of the government structure change, but also the work that prevention and intervention organizations are doing to have that intentional focus on youth who might be vulnerable to the violence that you're talking about.
I'll just briefly add to what's been said already. If you look at the bottom of page 3 of our report and the top of page 4, we talk about some of the big picture issues that contribute to a lot of the problems within our city, and that has to do with the racial disparities across every key indicator of quality of life, whether it's looking at home ownership, housing affordability, education, criminal justice contacts. All of those issues disproportionately affect the Black community, the Indigenous community, and other communities of color, and it makes it more likely that folks will come into contact with the police and have lifetime impacts with regard to the criminal justice system. So we're calling on the city to take a more holistic approach and to understand the importance of investments in all of those areas and addressing those disparities that we too often admire within the city of Minneapolis, but that we need to get serious about addressing.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mayor Frey, on the topic of violence, are you able to update us on the incident surrounding the Stone Ridge Bridge from over the weekend? It sounds like you know, an innocent bystander or 4 of them were caught in the midst of this, and one has sustained life-threatening injuries, and it sort of ties into a lot of the conversations we're having about community safety and confidence in the system.
Look, it's horrific when it happens on the Stone Arch Bridge. It's horrific when it happens on the north side. The kind of gun violence that we've seen nationwide over the last couple of years is not just unacceptable, it has a massive impact on communities for the long haul. I don't have any specifics to give you beyond what you already have at this point. Obviously, there's an investigation that's being conducted as we move forward, but this is something that we're paying very close attention to.
I got one more for
Please.
Nikema.
I think so. Do you have any more follow-up?
You know, you've been a critic of the mayor and of the police department in the past. I think after some announcements after Amira Locke, you had kind of publicly said you were reconsidering whether or not you're going to stay on this committee. Is there one thing in here you can point to that you think this is going to lead to the kind of meaningful change that you have been talking about for many years?
I think that within our report, there are several recommendations that will help to overhaul some of the current practices and policies within the Minneapolis Police Department, looking very specifically at training and discipline. Those are 2 areas where we have fallen far short of the expectations of this community, as well as national best practices. We need to professionalize the police department if we're going to have a police department that is going to be responding to 911 calls that are not mental health related. We need professionals to show up at the door, professionals who value the lives of all residents of Minneapolis, particularly low-income Black residents, Indigenous residents, and other residents of color, and looking at the focus on recruitment and building pipeline programs. That is another way that we think we can mitigate some of the harms and issues that have been caused, because too often we have officers who come in from the suburbs and exurbs who aren't as familiar with our local communities, particularly our communities of color, and it feels like an occupying force coming in. And so if you look at some of the community recommendations that I referenced earlier, they talk about moving closer to a community policing model where people know who is serving their neighborhood, which right now many people don't know. You don't know who's going to show up if you have to call 911, which leads people to feel uncomfortable with calling 911. And as Lisa referenced earlier, honing in more specifically on the violence intervention and prevention work and ensuring that it is resourced at adequate levels in light of the issues that we are dealing with in our city. I know that many white residents have been raising concerns about things happening in their communities, but sadly, for many, many years, Black folks have been saying the same thing, and it's been falling on deaf ears. And it's as if people are comfortable with Black bodies on the ground, Black people being carjacked, Black people having their homes broken into, and Black people are saying, we don't want that either. We want to feel safe in our own communities. We don't want to have to call 911, but if we do, we want someone who is going to show up at the door, who respects our humanity and who values us as a people. So I think all of these recommendations taken as a whole and implemented effectively will result in a significant change to the way that the Minneapolis Police Department does business and how we address the rising violence that we have to deal with in our city.
Thanks, everyone. Last one, thank you. Yep. So Lieutenant Molly Fisher addressed City Council this morning, I believe it was the audit committee on this issue around training officers.
Field training officers.
Field training officers. And in that, some 25 minutes, she described just challenges having to do with staffing issues right now. So how do those staffing issues intersect with some of the recommendations that you've laid out here today?
My honest opinion is even if we had the full complement of officers that are required under the city charter, we would still have issues with the field training officer program. The program needs to be audited and overhauled from the inside out. And it's not just a matter of bodies taking on those positions of field training officers, but it's the quality and caliber of those individuals serving in leadership roles who are adequately trained in order to be able to train new recruits. Right now, the system that's in place is far too pedestrian to have our police department functioning in the way that it should. And so we are asking for urgent attention to the field training officer program. We heard from one of our members, Charlie Adams III, who is a former Minneapolis police officer, and he talked about his experience with regard to the field training officer program. So he helped to inform many of our recommendations, and he talked about the gaps where an officer might have served in a position for a number of years, then they get promoted to a field training officer or FTO position, but they're not adequately trained in order to mentor and train upcoming officers. And so he would have younger recruits trying to follow his leadership even though he wasn't formally in the position. And they let the field training officers as well, from our perspective, have taught, and this is not all of them, but some of them, have taught new recruits Minneapolis's old way of doing business with regard to the police department, as opposed to the cultural shift that we want to see that reflects the aspirational values of people of this city. Thank you.
I have one more thing, sorry, Sarah, to add. So just in relation to that, we had a number of city staff that were present in these meetings that helped to provide context for our city policies as the work group was rolling out theirs. And one of the values there is it enabled us to not sit on our hands and wait. It enabled us to understand where this particular work group was moving, and then to start taking action around it. And so the FTO program and the policy that was rolled out in public anyway today at the audit committee is one example of that. And yes, there has needed to be quite a bit of work in there, and that work is happening. Thank you, everybody.